I stepped onto that yacht wearing a worn jacket and shoes still stained with engine oil. A man looked at me once and said flat and cold, "The staff should stand over there." My son said nothing. The future daughter-in-law's family smiled thinly, as if I were something extra, something that drifted into the party by mistake. They didn't know that a single phone call from me would have been enough to shut this entire vessel down, quietly. And I chose silence, so I could see clearly who they really were. If you're listening to this story and felt that something was wrong from the very first moment, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next, and leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. Now, let me tell you why I chose silence from the start. I've grown used to being mistaken for someone else. For years, I let people believe I was just an old man living off a pension, quiet, invisible, harmless, a small wooden house on the edge of town, warm enough in winter, an old Ford F-150 pickup, good enough to get me to the market and the clinic. I didn't live that way because I had to. I lived that way because after a lifetime of designing things meant to rise off the ground, I learned something simple. The lower you stay, the clearer you see people. My son Leo never asked too many questions. He believed what he saw: the pills on the kitchen table, the utility bills I paid on time, but never with much left over. He thought I was struggling, and maybe somewhere deep down he felt relieved, believing he had surpassed his father. I don't blame him. Youth needs its illusions to keep moving forward. Every month my investment fund still runs like clockwork. Numbers come and go on a screen. Cold, exact, without emotion. $65,000 a month doesn't excite me anymore. What weighs on me is something else entirely: the growing distance between me and Leo. Not because of money, but because of how he started seeing the world. Everything measured by appearance, by where you stand in a room. When Leo called and said Chloe's family wanted to meet me at a yacht party, I stayed quiet for a few seconds. His voice was careful, almost apologetic, as if he feared I'd refuse over the cost or because I wouldn't fit in. He reassured me, told me I just needed to show up, that I didn't have to worry about anything. But I heard something else beneath his words, a fear that I might embarrass him. I agreed right away, not out of curiosity about the party, but because I knew this was the moment, not to prove who I was, but to see who they were when they believed I was nobody. I opened my closet and chose the oldest outfit I owned, a jacket worn thin at the shoulders, one that had stood with me through years of noisy machine shops, shoes still marked with oil stains that never fully came out no matter how many times I cleaned them. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw exactly what they would see: outdated, faded, a man with no exchange value. The gift was what I prepared most carefully, not for its price, but for its meaning. A small wooden box, made by my own hands during quiet evenings, pine wood, not overly polished. Inside, I carved Leo's birth date, in my old handwriting. I knew that to many people, it would mean nothing, but to me, it was something money could never buy. On the drive to Newport Harbor, I took the old truck past rows of brightly lit homes. I thought about Chloe. She wasn't a bad girl. In our brief meetings, I sensed hesitation in her. She knew right from wrong, but had never quite found the courage to choose. Her family was different. They spoke about money the way people talk about the weather, naturally, and without warmth. The yacht came into view, so bright it made you forget the sunset behind it. Music, laughter, lights shimmering across the water. I paused before stepping aboard, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wondered if Leo understood what I was doing, or if he just wanted me to get through the night quickly, like something inconvenient that needed to be hidden. The moment my foot touched the deck, I felt it. The first look, not curiosity, judgment, fast, final. I knew that look. I had used it myself in boardrooms, when deciding who was worth listening to and who wasn't. This time, I wasn't. I didn't correct anyone, didn't explain a thing. I nodded when they pointed me to where I should stand, as if that place was obvious. There was no anger in me, only a sharp, steady clarity. This wasn't a party. It was a test, and I had stepped into it, fully prepared. From that moment on, I knew every word, every smile, every silence would reveal more than any resume ever could. So I decided to let them speak first, before I spoke the only thing that would ever need to be said later. No one asked my name as I stood there. A man in a dark suit glanced at my shoes, then leaned over and said something to the person beside him. I didn't hear the words, but the smirk was loud enough. Leo stood a few steps away. He avoided my eyes, as if that alone might make me disappear from the scene. Julian arrived with Beatrice shortly after. They didn't need introductions. The way they walked said everything. Julian shook Leo's hand, firmly asked about work, about deals that were heating up the market. When his eyes passed over me, they stopped for exactly 1 second. Not to greet me, but to classify me. Then he turned to a staff member and said loud enough for me to hear, "Bring more drinks to this area." I understood immediately. He thought I was part of the crew. I could have corrected him. 1 sentence would have done it, but I didn't. I picked up a nearby tray of glasses and walked slowly in the direction he pointed. No one looked surprised. No one questioned it. Everything unfolded smoothly, as if that place had always been meant for me. I moved through conversations not meant for me. They talked about houses, about acquisitions, about who had just been pushed out of some private club. The words floated past me light as champagne foam. Every now and then someone held out an empty glass without looking. I took it, replaced it with a full one, and moved on. No one said thank you. Beatrice watched me from a distance. Her expression didn't hide the irritation. When I passed by, she shifted slightly as if afraid something might cling to her dress. I heard her murmur about the smell of engine oil, just loud enough for a few laughs to ripple nearby. I didn't stop. I've spent enough time in rooms where the laughter wasn't meant for me. When it was time to sit, people chose their seats without thinking. Leo was pulled toward the center. Chloe sat beside him, her eyes flicking toward me, then away quickly. Beatrice looked around, then pointed toward the far end of the table near the exit to the deck. "It's cooler over there," she said, without looking at me. I nodded and sat down. The chair was low, unsteady. I thought they were probably used to people like me not needing comfort. The food was served. I ate slowly, not because it was good or bad, but because I was watching. The way Julian spoke when he believed himself above everyone else. The way Beatrice smiled while her eyes kept calculating. And Chloe's silence. That silence caught my attention more than anything. It wasn't agreement. It was fear. Fear of losing the place she had grown used to. When it came time for gifts, the mood lifted. Large boxes, designer bags placed on the table. I waited my turn. When I brought out the small wooden box, the air shifted. Julian took it, turned it over in his hands, as if deciding whether it was even worth opening. Beatrice looked at the box, then at me. "What is this?" she asked, disappointment barely hidden. "I made it myself," I said. "Nothing more." Julian laughed. Not loudly, but enough for others to notice. He opened the lid, glanced inside, then set it back on the table. "Interesting," he said. "Looks like something you'd keep screws in." A few more laughs followed. Someone joked that the wood probably caught fire easily. I looked at Leo. His head was down. He said nothing, did nothing. In that moment I saw more clearly than any words could show me, not because my gift was mocked, but because of my son's silence in the middle of that laughter, silence as a form of self-protection. After dinner, Julian stood and lightly patted my shoulder. "Come outside for a moment," he said, like an instruction. I followed him to the side of the yacht. The wind was stronger there, carrying the smell of the sea. Lights behind us cast long shadows across the deck. He looked at me again, this time more carefully. "You're Leo's father, right?" he asked, as if it had just occurred to him. I nodded. He smiled. The smile of a man who believes he's being generous. "I think we should speak frankly." I didn't answer right away. I waited. I'd been waiting all evening, and I knew this moment was coming. Julian lowered his voice, but not his contempt. He spoke about Leo's future, about reputation, about things that shouldn't be dragged down. He spoke as if I were a problem that needed to be handled cleanly. I stood there listening to every word without interrupting, because I understood now. This was no longer a party. This was where the lights and music stopped hiding the truth. When he finished, I looked out at the dark water below. The yacht still moved smoothly without a ripple, but inside me, something had been touched. Not a surge of anger, but a clear, unmistakable cold. I knew then. From that moment on, no one on that boat could pretend this was just a small misunderstanding. Julian didn't wait for my answer. He glanced around, making sure no one was paying attention. then reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a white envelope. The movement was smooth, familiar, the kind of gesture made by someone who has ended many unwanted conversations with money. He placed the envelope into my hand, lightly, the way you'd set a menu on a table. "There's $10,000 in there," he said. "Not much for us. But for you, it's different." He paused, watching my face. "All you need to do is sign this. A simple agreement." I looked at the envelope then, at the paper inside. Clean printed lines. Cold in their efficiency. I would not appear at the wedding. I would not be part of their lives afterward. In return, everything stays smooth. That was the word he used. Smooth. So I said slowly, "You're trying to buy my disappearance." Julian smiled. "Let's not use such heavy words. Think of it as a reasonable arrangement. Leo has a future. Chloe needs the right background. And you," his eyes traveled over me, head to toe, "you could use something to feel secure." I asked the question I'd been carrying since the moment I stepped onto that boat. "What's a father's dignity worth?" Julian shrugged. "Dignity doesn't pay bills. Reality does." He pushed the envelope closer. "And believe me, this is the largest amount someone like you can hold without bowing your head." I took the envelope. Not out of greed, but because I wanted to feel what they believed in. They believed everything had a price, and that they were the ones who set it. I didn't sign. I didn't hand it back either. I asked one more question as if I were still considering. And my grandchild Julian exhaled a hint of impatience, slipping through. "You won't be involved. We'll tell people Leo comes from a family that's no longer around. Simple. Clean." He said clean, the way someone talks about a contract already stamped and filed. I nodded slowly, as if understanding. That was when I noticed Chloe standing a few steps away. She didn't come closer. She didn't walk away. Her eyes landed on the envelope in my hand, then turned aside. I waited for her to say something. Just one sentence. She stayed silent. That silence weighed more than the envelope. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was like a door closing very slowly. Slow enough for the person inside to know they'd been left behind. I looked at Chloe. Her head was lowered as if she were staring at the deck. But I knew she was hiding. Hiding from having to choose. Julian noticed my gaze. "She understands," he said quickly. "This is what's best for everyone." "Everyone," I repeated. I thought of Leo back inside, forcing polite smiles at conversations that weren't his. I thought of the quiet nights in my wooden house, shaping that small box by hand. Nothing about that belonged to everyone the way Julian meant it. I set the envelope on the railing. The sea breeze lifted the edge, making it tremble. Julian lunged forward and grabbed it. "Don't do something stupid," he said. "You think you have a choice." I looked straight at him. "I always have a choice," I said. "You're just used to people like me not using it." At that moment, Julian's phone vibrated. Once, then again. He frowned and checked the screen. I saw the color drain from his face. Not anger. Panic. Poorly concealed. He stepped away and answered. I didn't try to listen. I didn't need to. His voice was loud enough for the wind to carry fragments to me. "That's impossible." "We had an agreement." "Who's behind this?" Then silence. Long, heavy. Julian turned back. The smile was gone. "There's a bit of a problem," he said, but his voice no longer held firm ground. He looked at me differently now, as if trying to remember who I was. Not a poor old man anymore, but a variable. My phone vibrated right after. I didn't rush to answer. I looked at Julian for one more second. "Excuse me," I said. "Work." I picked up. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar, a short report, clear, direct. My reply was just as brief. "I'm standing right in front of him," I said. "Proceed. Finish what was started." Julian froze. Beatrice appeared at the doorway, her face tight with alarm. Chloe looked at me, this time without turning away. Her eyes carried fear, and something close to regret. But it came too late. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and glanced at the envelope still resting on the railing. "You should keep it," I said to Julian. "You might need it." I walked back inside without looking over my shoulder. The music was still playing, but the rhythm was off. I knew it then. From that moment on, the party no longer belonged to them, and what they were about to face wasn't loud revenge, but the quiet consequence of underestimating what they believed was worth the least. The atmosphere inside the main cabin shifted fast. The music was still playing, but the laughter thinned out, as if everyone sensed a crack forming beneath the deck. Julian followed me in, trying to hold on to his composure. He pulled Beatrice aside and spoke in quick, hushed tones. I didn't need to hear it to know what was being said. Around them, their wealthy acquaintances started checking watches, glancing at phones, searching for excuses to leave. A few minutes later, Julian's phone vibrated again. This time, he didn't step away. He answered right there in the cabin, his voice unsteady. "That's impossible," he said. "We already signed." The silence on the other end stretched long enough to drain his patience. When the call ended, Julian stood still, as if the ground beneath him had been pulled away. Beatrice rushed over and whispered something. Julian shook his head. I could see his hand trembling slightly as he slipped the phone away. A guest asked what was going on. Julian forced a smile, called it a small misunderstanding, but his eyes betrayed him. There are things money can't hide, especially when a man is backed into a corner. I stood near the bar, not moving forward. I didn't need to. Everything was already in motion. One man in the crowd recognized me. He looked closer, then leaned in to whisper to someone beside him. I saw the change in his eyes. Not respect, recognition, the realization that something important had been missed from the very start. Julian stepped in front of me. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. "You think this is a joke?" "I'm not joking," I said. "I'm just no longer silent." He was about to respond when Beatrice's phone rang. She answered, and the color drained from her face. "Our accounts," she said too quickly, forgetting who could hear. "They say they've been temporarily frozen." That sentence carried far enough for several people to catch it. A pause spread through the room without anyone asking for it. The once lively guests exchanged looks calculating. I knew this moment well. The moment when surface-level wealth starts to lose its power. I took out my phone again. Not to show off, just to finish what had been set in motion. "Go ahead and complete it," I said. "I don't want this dragged out." Julian stared at me like I was a stranger. "Who are you?" he asked. This time there was no contempt left, only confusion. I didn't answer right away. I removed my worn jacket and placed it on a chair. Under the lights, the watch on my wrist became visible. Not flashy, but enough for those who understood to understand. I noticed a few eyes fix on my wrist, then quickly turn away, as if afraid of being caught noticing. "I'm the man you didn't think was worth asking his name," I said. "And I'm the one who just decided your company won't be standing much longer." Julian took a step back. Beatrice grabbed his hand, but her pride was gone. Chloe stood nearby, pale. She looked at me, then at her parents, as if realizing for the first time they weren't untouchable. A staff member approached and explained there was an issue with the yacht's payment system. Julian spun around. "That's not possible," he said. "We prepaid." "I know," I said. "And I know which account you used." Julian looked at me, mouth opening, but no words came out. I pulled the check he had offered earlier from my pocket. I didn't tear it. I didn't throw it away. I handed it to the staff member. "Use this," I said. "Cover tonight." The staff member looked to Julian for confirmation. Julian said nothing. Beatrice turned away. I signed my name, slowly, clearly. When the staff member left, I set the pen down. "I don't need your money," I said, "but I won't let anyone else pay for my dignity." The music stopped. No one asked for it, but whoever was in charge understood the party was over. Guests began to leave in small groups. No one said goodbye to Julian the way they had earlier. No one asked about deals or opportunities. Silence settled in without needing to be loud. Leo walked up to me. He looked at me for a long time. "Dad," he said, his voice rough. There was no apology yet, just a late confusion. "Tonight you only need to watch," I told him. "Don't say anything." He nodded. Chloe stood behind him, hands clasped together. She wanted to speak. I knew that, but I didn't turn back. Some words, if not spoken at the right moment, lose their meaning. I walked toward the bow of the yacht. The night wind was cool and steady. The lights behind me grew distant. I didn't feel triumph, only lighter, as if a burden had finally been set down where it belonged. I knew what had happened tonight wasn't a loud collapse, but a door closing very slowly. And behind that door, each of them would have to face the true value of who they were. I stayed at the bow a little longer, until the night wind cleared my head enough that I wouldn't say anything unnecessary. Behind me, the yacht had grown quieter. The party didn't need an announcement to end. It ended on its own, the moment the most confident people realized no one was listening anymore. Leo came out and stood beside me. He didn't ask questions. He didn't explain himself. We looked in the same direction where the dark water blended into the horizon. I could tell he was trying to stay steady, the same way I had years ago when I first understood the world doesn't run on the rules we're taught as children. I didn't come here to embarrass you, I said first, so he wouldn't have to guess. I came so you could see clearly where you were standing. Leo nodded. I know, he said, after a moment. I just didn't expect it to be this clear. It's always clear, I said. We just don't like to look. Chloe appeared a little later. She stopped a few steps away, hesitant. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and tired. I'm sorry, she said, for my silence. I turned to look at her. Not harsh, not gentle either. Silence is a choice, I said, and tonight you chose. What matters is what you choose tomorrow. She nodded. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. I didn't comfort her. I didn't accuse her. Some lessons don't need extra words. The next morning I left the yacht early. No goodbyes, no closing scene. I drove my old truck back to the wooden house, opened the door, and let the familiar scent of wood greet me. I hung the worn jacket back in its place. It had done its job. I made a cup of coffee, sat at the table, and looked at the small wooden box I had brought with me, and brought back. I placed it in the drawer, not because it had been disrespected, but because it was still exactly where it belonged. Leo called that afternoon. He said he and Chloe had talked for a long time. No rushed decisions, just questions they had avoided before. I listened. I didn't interfere. When he asked what I thought, I gave him one condition. I won't open any doors for you, I said. You walk on your own. If you fall, I'll still be here. But I won't pull you up with money. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, yes. This time, not out of fear. As for Julian and Beatrice, I didn't follow things closely. I knew enough. Doors that had always been open to them began to close, quietly, without announcements. Their world was built on trust and cash flow. When both started to shake, everything else adjusted on its own. I didn't see it as a victory, just a consequence. A few weeks later, Leo came to visit. He dressed more simply, spoke less, listened more. We fixed the fence behind the house. Slow work, steady. I saw something I had been hoping for, his learning patience. Not patience for a reward, but patience to understand the value of each small step. Chloe came too once. She brought a cake, homemade. Not perfect, but sincere. She didn't bring up the night on the yacht. She asked me about choosing wood, about why I liked working with my hands. I answered just enough, not to test her, but to see if she was willing to learn. I thought that was fair. I never announced who I was. I didn't need to. The people who needed to know already knew. Those who only valued appearances were no longer close. My life returned to its old rhythm. Early mornings, coffee, a few necessary calls. Then silence. I felt lighter. Not because I had won, but because I no longer had to hide anything from myself. One evening, Leo asked if I had any regrets. I thought for a moment. If I hadn't done what I did, I said I would always wonder whether you were walking with people who respected who you are, or only the position you hold. Now, at least, I don't have that question anymore. He nodded. The innocence in his eyes was gone, but they hadn't hardened yet. I think that's the best a father can hope for. When night fell, I stepped onto the porch and looked at the sky. I remembered the thought I had saved for the end. Money can buy you a place to stand, but it can't buy your direction. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't need to. I believe anyone listening to this story will find their own compass. And if they ask what I learned from all of this, my answer is simple. Real wealth isn't in what you can hide. It's in what you never need to prove. If you've stayed with this story until now, thank you for taking the time to listen. If it made you think about family, about money, or about how we treat one another, please like, subscribe, and share so this story can reach more people. Every bit of your support gives me the reason to keep telling stories like this. Honest, steady, and human. Thank you for staying until the very end.